Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of All Angles. I'm Dion Jacks Miller. So we are in the middle of the budget debate. So we have with us the opposition leader, Mark Golding, as well as the opposition spokesperson on finance, Julian Robinson. Both have made their presentations in the budget debate. And before you all ask, we've already extended our invitation to both the finance minister and the prime minister. Well, thank you so much for coming in. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Before I get into the specifics of your presentation, there was a point made in a discussion I had with Clyde Williams yesterday on radio. And he was saying that the whole process, he thinks, needs to be revamped, to be more participatory. And I was wondering your thoughts of both of you on that. Perhaps you first, Mr. Golding.
The budget process.
Yes. So in other words, he was saying people need to be able to have an input into the actual proposals as well as the budget before it's presented as a fait accompli.
Well, the budget call, which is what is sent out by finance to the ministries, takes place in October or that time of year. So that's when the process of compiling the budget really gets going. I agree that there should be more broad input, if possible, into it. Especially on the issue of priorities, because I think that's where the public would probably have most value to add as to what they think resources ought to really be focused on doing. But it's a very technical and time-consuming thing. So the necessary procedures to make that happen don't really exist. It has been said that in the constituency debate that we have in the House prior to the budget process, that is supposed to evoke ideas for things that should be dealt with in the budget. But in practice, I don't think that really happens. So he has a fair point. I mean, deepening the democracy would involve finding ways in which the public can weigh in on what their areas of concern and what their priorities would be. But as it stands now, really by technocrats, it's all about balancing the budget and finding ways to fund gaps and that kind of thing.
What I would say, I remember when I was last in government, we started an open budget process where citizens, we could break down the budget in a very simple, practical way. I believe it continued, but I'm not sure if it still exists right now. It's very technical. I think the jargon would probably lose most people, but I believe it can be broken down in a simple way that people can understand and participate. But right now, I don't think there is a lot of opportunity. The constituency debates don't influence what happens in the final analysis. I mean, the way the budget is structured, the Minister of Finance always has the closing where presumably you could take into account contributions made by the opposition and input from the business sector, etc., and make adjustments at the closing. In my experience, it's rarely done that you see major changes. Right. You may see some minor, but not major. So I would agree with Clyde that there is an opportunity to have more citizens' participation in the process.
Because right now it almost seems like we're not talking to one another. Not sure.
Well, we know, well, Dion, I would say we try to reflect the realities of what's happening in the country. I mean, yeah, there's a very technical side of it, but, certainly coming out of the hurricane, our presentations were very focused on addressing the needs of the people who 4 or 5 months later have no roof, sleeping in car, they have lost their businesses. So, we certainly brought that to the table in the recommendations that we made.
And I wouldn't say we're speaking just to those who are present in the House. One is aware that it's a national event, the budget debate, and one is speaking to the nation. So, in casting your thoughts and in deciding what you're going to say and so on, I think you're mindful of what this mood of the public is, what the needs are out there that you've come across and you've become aware of, and you try and reflect that as best you can.
All right, so we're going to go to a break. When we come back now, we start talking about some of the proposals made by the representatives of the opposition in the budget debate. We'll soon come.
Speaker, the next second revenue initiative we are proposing is the establishment of a digital nomad program. And I'll explain what that is. That is a special legal permit allowing remote workers, freelancers, and entrepreneurs to live and work in Jamaica while employed by a company or clients anywhere in the world. Every year, 4 million tourists visit Jamaica. We have the brand, we have the climate, we have the culture. And we also have the connectivity infrastructure that those remote workers are looking for. What we do not have as yet is a structured program that allows them to stay longer, to work from here and spend their money right here in Jamaica.
Thank you so much for staying with us. We continue with all angles with the opposition leader and the opposition spokesperson on finance. And let me come to you on that, Julian Robinson, because a lot of people, this has caught people's imagination, this digital nomad idea. The president of the Realtors Association was quoted by the Gleaner saying she thinks it would be good for our market, but she said it needs some fleshing out. She still had some questions. But one of the problems I've heard people raising is, hold on, does this mean now a whole heap of foreigners coming in, driving up rental rates now and making it even harder for Jamaicans to find somewhere to live?
I don't think so, because there are two different markets. Jamaica has an affordable housing crisis. There are over 200,000 Jamaicans who are seeking affordable houses, which is the role of an NHT. That is a totally separate thing from persons who would come here for 3 months, 6 months, and who would be targeting primarily villas, Airbnb places, those places. I don't think it's two separate parts of the market.
You know, so them, for instance, in Kingston, in a lot of these apartments that young professionals can't afford to rent or even buy.
Yeah, but I don't think their being here is going to make it worse. I mean, if I take my own constituency as an example, many of those townhouses and apartments may have 10, 20% permanent occupancy, and the rest is for Airbnb. So in fact, I believe they being here will help those persons who have made investments in purchasing townhouses and apartments primarily for the Airbnb market. And quite frankly, I think if you speak to people in the sector, there is probably an oversupply at the high level in terms of the price point there, but where the demand is at the lower level. And that's where government has to play. We're not competing there for the persons who are coming here. And I believe there's a net benefit in terms of the economic activity. There will be at Airbnbs, there will be at villas, there will be consuming, but they're not going to be pushing people who need starter homes in the $10, $15 million range. We need to fix that. And that's a separate issue which the government has not been able to do in any meaningful way. So I don't accept the argument at all that it is going to force young professionals who are seeking houses out of the market.
You want to add on that, Mr. Golding?
I think Julian is correct. I mean, there's different market segments. The natives are persons who are typically earning good money, have the wherewithal to come and live in a place where they feel it will be more comfortable and a change of environment that they may relish, but still function economically in the way they do. The kind of places that they would want to be living in and that they could afford is very different to the young professional just starting out in Jamaica who has a real problem getting a house. That's a different issue which needs to be tackled, as Julian has said. But I don't think the digital nomad idea is going to be competing with the young professional who is seeking a place to live.
Okay, so one of the points Mr. Golding made in his presentation was in relation to climate justice and us in Jamaica trying to get some kind of compensation using international law for damage caused by climate change as a result of the hurricane. Take a look.
Jamaica, in our interests, in our own interests, and out of a duty to other vulnerable countries like ours, which continue to bear the loss and damage from climate change and will continue to bear it, should now assemble a team of the most experienced legal experts and prepare a legal brief on the possibility of recovering compensation for the loss and damage inflicted on us by Melissa. The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, opened the door last year, and we must push that door further open. Speaker, the legal brief should consider the prospects of a case being taken to the International Court of Justice, relying on the responsibility of certain countries for the global temperature increases that resulted in the damage wrought by Hurricane Melissa. A decision of the International Court on this issue would be binding on the states found liable for the overheating that triggered that triggered Hurricane Melissa.
Mr. Golding was referring to a decision, an advisory opinion rather, that had been handed down last year, July 2025, by the International Court of Justice, commonly called the World Court of the United Nations, that had essentially said that states do have a responsibility to protect the environment. If they breach those responsibilities, then they can be held legally liable, including by having to pay reparations. So the really, really interesting point you brought up there. One of the concerns I was talking about earlier this afternoon with some guests is that we know those things take forever and a day.
Mm-hmm.
So Jamaicans might hear that and think, okay, we might have money coming, but in reality, just seeking an advisory opinion is a process that could take years, and then trying to actualize it now is another whole step again. So how realistic or how practical a suggestion is this?
It's not a suggestion about trying to fund this current fiscal year, coming fiscal year budget or anything of that nature. It is really a necessary strategic step for Jamaica to take. We have just been hit by a monster hurricane, one of the strongest hurricanes in the history of measured hurricanes, and it has caused loss and damage to our country of about 56% of our GDP. That's the latest estimate. I see some newspapers still quoting the 40%, which was a huge number anyway, but that has been reassessed by PIOJ because that was just, the 40% really reflect just physical assets and not total economic losses. So 56% is a massive hit. And the reality is that most experts have concluded that Melissa was a phenomenon that was contributed to in a significant way by global warming and the warming of the Caribbean Sea. Now, I think that we have a duty to ourselves, to generations to come, to other countries in a similar position to ours, to push the envelope on this and to be advocates for some kind of compensatory regime. I'm not saying that it will necessarily result in an order for money to be paid to us next year or anything. It is a journey. But look, when the civil rights movement started, that was a journey too, and it eventually achieved its objective of the Civil Rights Act and so on in the United States. We have the ability, given our position, I think, to mount a strong case, and I think we should advocate and push for it, because through that advocacy, other things may happen. It may raise the consciousness of nations that are polluting nations now, are contributing heavily to global warming, that they have a deep responsibility. And, for example, establishing or funding existing funds which have been committed to in the climate process, but which are not fully funded yet, getting those funds in place so that you can find compensation from a fund without having to actually go and litigate the matter. I'm just saying we are victims of this hurricane, and we may be victims of future climate events. And I think we should really be pushing the envelope because we didn't cause that. Our contribution to global warming is minimal, but other countries have been contributing to it for centuries. So, that's why I said we shouldn't just sit back and just think our lot is to just borrow a lot more money and just accept that this is a situation which we're unfortunate, but we have to live with it. And try and move ahead, because all that additional debt that we're going to have to take on is going to be a burden for generations to come too. So that's why I'm thinking this is a time that we should be more assertive, because we're not alone, but we're really in a particular situation, having gone through this calamity back in October.
Well, one of the issues, though, is that the main polluting countries tend to shy away from anything that would see them paying anything. So we see them refusing to accept jurisdiction or accept that the court would be able to make any orders that would apply to them, or if the order is made, they even pay. So let's assume we lead this charge, we get an advisory opinion, or we even win a case. Mm-hmm. Might it not be a Pyrrhic victory then, if you can't get anything practical as a result?
I don't think there are guarantees in this area of any particular financial outcome at a particular point in time. But justice is on our side. And the World Court's ruling last July has opened the door for the arguments to be made. And in the process of pursuing justice, you may find that people's positions change and their inclination to support existing multilateral efforts that they may not have been adequately supportive of they may come on board. It may take some years, but I just think we shouldn't just sit back and let this thing go as if it's our lot to suffer in this way, when the reasons why we are suffering are man-made reasons largely, and which we had very little to do with.
Okay, let's go to our next clip. This is back to Mr. Robinson.
The government is projecting for this coming year to withdraw $9 billion from the Bank of Jamaica. We would take an additional $1 billion to bring the total to 10. Now, I want to make a distinction. This is not the NIR. These are surpluses that are generated from the profits of the BOJ. We also looked at other public bodies who have surpluses, and I looked at the FCJ with a net surplus of 3.14 billion and profits of 5.15. And we would do a transfer of $1 billion from there. So, Madam Speaker, some of these institutions have demonstrated with their performance these surpluses, which, if put to the central government, would not affect their core operation.
Now, that proposal was within the context of the opposition saying we wouldn't have imposed this tax package, all these new taxes. We think there are other things the government could have done. And no, the two suggestions you made there take more from Bank of Jamaica and Factories Corporation. One can see that as something that could happen immediately. A lot of your other suggestions, though, weren't. They sound more medium term. So in the reality of the immediate economic crisis facing the country as a result of Melissa, how do you then get away from saying the taxes are necessary because that money is needed? No, not down the line when money can trickle down through your various proposals.
Well, I'd say two things. When I look at the digital nomad initiative, Barbados implemented this within 4 to 6 weeks coming out of COVID. Yeah. This does not take any major infrastructure. You need to set up a website, you need to set up a platform that people can apply, and you have a system to issue visas. There's no major infrastructure here. The issue related to the electronic invoicing would take a little more time, which is why we were conservative about what we thought we could achieve in year one. Now,
you think realistically anything can be achieved in year one?
Absolutely.
We've seen, though, how long it takes to implement, and you're talking there about a system that would involve new software.
Yeah, and I'm saying everything depends on whether it's a priority for you or not. I mean, they're not starting from scratch where they have no systems. They already have systems. There is already an optional system where businesses can upload invoices. So it's not that nothing exists. Now, this would require some investment, but we're talking about a 12-month financial year. And that is why we were conservative about only a 2% gain. Now, when you look at how these systems have operated in other countries, when they're fully implemented, the gains are about 10, 15%, or even more. Now, we're not projecting that in year one because we recognize there are going to be challenges in the implementation. Right. But I do believe it can be done within a year. You can start that process if it is treated as a priority.
Yeah, it's a critical thing. It's a question of political will and serious hands-on management to drive it forward. I mean, if you treat it like a project which is absolutely essential and must get done, it can be done. We've had legislation developed from scratch and implemented in this country within 4 months. It is possible to do it. And even in the government's budget and their revenue measures, this digital services tax, they're not projecting any revenue at all in 2026. It's not until the first quarter of 2027, which is the last quarter of the fiscal year, that they expect to collect something, because they recognize that it's going to take some time to work through the parameters of that whole thing as well. So we're saying, rather than focus on the parameters of imposing a new tax, you can focus on the parameters of making the system more efficient in ways which have been proven internationally to work. And, in terms of how long it will take and so on, we believe that it is possible, if you really focus on it, within 6 to 8 months to get this thing started. And then you can collect something for the second half of the fiscal year. And it has been proved to be such an effective measure in other countries that we feel it could have a significant impact on the overall collections of revenue for the country.
But if we pull out a little bit and look at your proposals as a whole, which is this tax tax package is a bad idea. We wouldn't have done it. Isn't what's happening here that you have the luxury of being in opposition? So you can say the popular thing, which is don't impose new taxes, while your proposals perhaps underestimate how long the benefits would take to accrue when, as I said, the government needs money now.
Listen, we are in opposition. Our role is to look at the budget to assess whether it makes economic sense, and to the extent that we think it doesn't, to identify other ways that we could fund the budget without going down a road which is not economically optimal. We're in a recession in Jamaica essentially since Minister. We've had negative growth. We're projecting to have more negative growth for the coming fiscal year. The Middle East situation is upon us. Prices are going to go up. It's going to be a very difficult time to imposing additional taxes on people. And we've come up with a series of measures which have been thought through and which we feel, with the necessary management skill and political will, could be implemented. You know, we're in opposition, so we're not going to be the ones rolling it out. But that we've put it on the table, and we'll hear what the government have to say about it. I'm sure they will say, oh, it can't be done and so on. But I don't think that's true. I think that it can be done if there's a necessary resources, human, intellectual, and effort put behind it to make it happen.
Well, I wasn't necessarily saying it can't be done, but that's why I was asking you.
In terms of pace.
There isn't a great danger that you're underestimating the time within which revenue could be collected.
As I've said, I think that it would be difficult to ramp it up to the levels of potential that it ultimately would have. But I think you could get it started, and it could start to have an impact, a positive impact, on the revenues of the country in the second half of the fiscal year.
For instance, your position that the government needs to stop extracting money from the National Housing Trust.
Yes.
Again, is this not the worst possible time to make that particular call?
No, I think it's an essential call at this time because we have a massive problem of housing in the country where we've had thousands and thousands of Jamaicans who have suffered housing damage in Western Jamaica in particular. Some have had their houses totally destroyed. Others have had serious roof damage. Others have had less serious damage, but still damage that needs to be fixed. How can you be depleting the major housing agency of the country, the National Housing Trust, of capital, taking it out, weakening it finally, when tremendous job to be done in restoring the housing stock of the country? That is what I think is the way it should be looked at. Leave resources in the NHT so it can be purposed to deal with the problem that our country is facing at this time. Don't deplete it of resources so that you can pay housekeeping expenses of central government. This is something we've been committed to for some time, there, and it's something that we said we had to find other ways that we could achieve this, because we think it's, in principle, this whole extraction of resources was supposed to last 4 years when it was first implemented, and it has now lasted 12 years. And the government announced in the throne speech they're going to be doing it for 5 more years. I mean, the amount of resources taken out of the Housing Trust when we have this crisis, really, of inadequate, affordable houses, on top of the Melissa damage, it really doesn't make sense to us. And
we haven't seen any indication that the Housing Trust is up to limits in terms of using its resources to build or provide housing solutions.
And that's a management issue. I mean, the issue you raised earlier about whether nomads would displace people looking for houses, and I said there are 2 separate markets. The market where there's a demand now is where NHT should be.
Hold that thought. We'll come back, but I just have to take a break. We'll soon come. Thank you so much for staying with us. We continue with you on All Angles. Still have with us for the full program the opposition leader Mark Golding and the Shadow Finance Minister Julia Robinson. Just before the break, we're talking about the opposition's position, saying that the government needs to stop extracting billions from the National Housing Trust for budgetary support. And I let Mr. interrupted you, Mr. Robinson, because I was saying that we're still seeing the Housing Trust build, for instance, and provide housing for the 2026-27 financial year. They projected that they'll be building close to 11,000 housing solutions and spending over $50 billion on capital expenditure. So that doesn't sound like it's sending the message that the Housing Trust is strapped.
Well, what I would say, the unmet need for housing for persons who are willing and able and would like a house, there are about 200,000 Jamaicans, right? the NHT should be using all its resources where it can. It can provide the infrastructure, whether they put in water, sewage, roads, and then private developers or contractors would bill at a particular price point. You might say to them, you need to deliver a unit between 10 to 15 million. So two people can come together, use their NHT contribution, and they can borrow and start there. Now, what we are seeing is they're not using all the resources that are available to them to provide houses in that market.
But they weren't even before the extraction started.
Well, to me, it's an issue of management. If you have this unmet demand and you have the resources and you can't deploy the resources to meet the need.
I mean, the industry has at times really focused on the affordable market. In the inner city housing projects that they did, one in my constituency, one in West Kent, and there are others, provided a significant number of homes to people at an affordable price point. But they're not doing that any longer. And in fact, this extraction of money from them every year has led to changes. For example, most of the loans that they now make, they don't fund it themselves from their resources because they can't. They're having to outsource that to the private lending market. And because the NHT lends at lower rates than the banks do, the NHT is having to pay money to the banks to subsidize the interest rates that are being charged, which is a further financial hit to the NHT. So it really is having an impact on the ability of the NHT to have this catalytic role in housing that it was supposed to be having. We don't think at a time like now, when there's this accumulated shortage of affordable homes and the demand for homes amongst young professionals and others, and the problem of restoring the housing stock that has been ravaged by the hurricane, this is not the time to be taking resources out of the NHT. That's our position there.
But again, and I mean, I think people can understand, especially people who don't have houses, can understand, sure, that need needs to be met. But at the same time, are you actually balancing it with, I keep coming back to this, the immediacy of the need for revenue for the government right now. So you're speaking about needing to be providing the housing and the employment that will come with it. All that is understandable. But at the same time, we're in March, we're in the fiscal year is
April 1.
Correct. And by the time you have the kind of knock-on effects you're talking about, the fiscal year done, whereas the government need money now.
Well, in his presentation, Julian outlined how we would replace the funding that we say should not be taken from in the form of taxes or from the NHT. Some of the fiscal year is 12 months. Yeah. It's not that all the money has to be found in month one.
April 1st, yeah.
That's not the way it works. It's spread out over the period of the year. And we feel that some of the things that we've talked about are funding that's available in the near term, and some may take some months to get going. And we feel it's possible to achieve these targets that which have been set essentially by the government in the way they're funding the gap. It is possible to do it within a year. And, our position. And, I don't think it's an unreasonable position, because I know that from my own experience in government that if you want to get things done on a timely basis, it is possible. But it requires hands-on, detailed management from the political right through the civil service to get it done, and a shared commitment to the cause. And it can happen. That's how, when we were in government, we passed every IMF test. We delivered every piece of legislation on time to change the tax system, to change the commercial architecture, to reform the economy so that we could solve our debt crisis. That is how Jamaica turned around. That is how we have had the benefits of proper fiscal results over the last 10 to 15 years.
I tell you what, let me go to the next clip since it relates to what you just said.
Okay. We are not sufficiently focused on tackling these inefficiencies. The sloth is reflected in our legislative process, Madam Speaker. Laws of strategic importance that require urgent amendment or passage remain on the books for years without the problem being addressed.
So, for instance, the laws you are speaking of when we're passing, and I remember, I think you were Justice Minister at the time, and you were boasting at one time of 40 statutes passed in a period of time. Those were, though, when we had the IMF cracking the whip over us, and they were related to the financial reform process.
Yes.
When we are operating without that kind of impetus, then we don't see that kind of speed in the legislative process. So I wanted to play that to ask specifically, what are you saying should be done differently to speed up the legislative process?
Well, at that time, Jamaica had signed an agreement that committed us to delivering certain legislation by specific dates over a 3-year period.
Hence my point.
And those commitments were public, and I was the Minister of Justice at the time, and I was determined to ensure that under my watch we weren't going to miss those deadlines. So I rolled up my sleeves and I worked with the drafters and others in the public service, and if we had to meet on weekends, we met on weekends, and if we had to stay till late at night, we stayed until late at night, but we got it done.
But that's not sustainable over for an ongoing process. So that's because, as I said, we had the IMF whip over us. We needed to get X done in X period of time, and people can't operate like that when they know this is urgent, this is an emergency. But we're not talking about that, no.
Well, I think we are. I think we are in a crisis. I think we are in a low growth environment. We are in a paradigm where we're not moving forward in the way we should, and where we've been ravaged by a terrible hurricane, and we need to get out of the slump that has caused, restore our productive capacity, and move the economy forward. And I think it requires that kind of level of commitment to getting through that process. So the fact that the IMF aren't over us with a whip, as you put it, is really not the point. I think it's, if we are committed to achieving it and we set our targets, we can deliver. I believe that. I think we have the capacity to do it, but I just don't feel that there's a sense of real urgency in the way the economy is being managed by the government to get these things done. And I mean, especially in the legislative area, their performance has been very, very poor.
But I think that's precisely the point. You say we have the capacity to do it. And I'm zeroing in on capacity, not talking about expertise per se, because one of the things I hear is that our capacity is not where it should be in terms of, for instance, the number of drafters we have.
We've always had shortages in that area. That's nothing new. And we, from time to time, reached out to the Commonwealth and got drafters seconded here, some of them have stayed for many years after their original secondment. It's a question of how you marshal the resources that you have at your disposal, how you inspire them to get on board and to really deliver of themselves and go the extra mile to ensure that Jamaica gets where it needs to go to. And I think that leadership is critical to achieve that. Because you have to, the people who you're asking to put out the extra effort have to see you being willing to do it too. And that's, I think, how we would manage it. That's how we would manage the country going forward, to get us out of this slump, to get us out of this crisis.
Yeah, I used to think I liked drafting until I got marks for my first couple of assignments from Mr. Carson. That was the
memory. Yeah.
That was the end of that.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the next clip.
Why not roll out a national health insurance scheme, beginning with full coverage for our most vulnerable? Children from birth to 18 years, seniors 65 years and older, and persons with disabilities. Start with them. This expansion of coverage should be a cornerstone of building back better than before.
All right, this is one of the things that sounds good. Everybody would want universal health insurance. We need health insurance. We want everybody to be insured. But how do we get there? Because, again, it's easy to propose all kind of pie-in-the-sky things when you don't have to fund it. You're not responsible for implementing it.
Right. I mean, Julian focused on how we would fund the fiscal year's budget to come. He had covered that well, and I was covering a more strategic approach to the restoration and recovery of Jamaica over the medium term. The government has lined up, they say, 6.7 billion US of resources that they intend to draw down over that period to fund what the recovery would be. I was saying, well, these are the things that need to be done to address the real issues that people have. And I use that opportunity to say some of the things that we think should be prioritized and how we would deal with it were we in government. And the health situation is one of them. So I don't think it's a question of a lack of resources. I mean, in terms of how soon you can deliver, that's something that we can discuss. And I'm not saying that a health insurance system could be delivered in the current fiscal year. I was talking over the medium term. What is the strategy that we should be pursuing, especially at a time when the fiscal rules have been suspended? And that means that you have 2 years, 2 fiscal years essentially, where you can really push hard to deliver the kind of investments that need to be delivered to get us with a certain amount of forward momentum in the economy, that we're in a virtuous circle where we're building wealth that's delivering revenues to the country that can be reinvested and so on. And that is how you propel growth forward and get the country moving forward at a much quicker rate. We need to start front-ending as much of that as possible because the fiscal rules are suspended, so you have more opportunity to do the heavy lifting now than you will after the 2 years expires. And that was a message I was trying to bring across.
Let's go to the break soon. And we are in the final segment of our program for the full hour. We've had the opposition leader and the opposition spokesperson on finance. And just before the break, Mr. Golding had been talking about the opposition's proposal for health insurance, and he was saying this is a time to start planning those kinds of programs with the fiscal rules relaxed because of the hurricane damage. And that's precisely one of the concerns that some people have expressed, including the finance minister saying that, though, is not a signal to signal irresponsibility.
No.
And excessive spending that would pull us backwards.
Right. Well, look, I'm very committed to fiscal responsibility. I was very involved in the process of implementing the current version of the fiscal rules when Peter Phillips was the Minister of Finance and Portia Simpson was Prime Minister. I was in charge of the legislative program of the government, and the fiscal rules had to be refined and put into. I understand them, and I understand the design of them and the reason why we have them. But there's also a reason why we suspend the fiscal rules from time to time where there's been a calamity. And that is because it's recognized that the productive capacity of the country may have been damaged, and it requires some additional effort to restore that so that you can generate surpluses again that can take the debt down to where you want to go. And I'm saying that's the situation we're in now, and we need to use that opportunity wisely. And I mean, the government has lined up these resources. They've told us $6.7 billion of resources that they want to roll out over the medium term. And I'm saying, well, that's great. And let's make sure that we spend that money. If we're going to use that money, we spend it on things that are going to make a real long-term, medium-term difference to the economy, to the productive capacity of the economy, to our competitiveness, to our productivity. And so that we can move from a low-wage, low-growth, low-tech model, which is where we are now, with our people earning $7,000 on average per year compared to 20-something in Barbados and 20 in Trinidad and so on. We need to do something to turn that around. And we as being in opposition, we're indicating the strategic priorities that we would be pursuing to achieve that.
But at the same time, the relaxation, as you indicated, has to do with restoration, rebuilding, and so on, not putting in place social programs that we can't afford yet.
Right, but I'm saying the social programs are to be rolled out at a time when the economy is beginning to recover and where it's generating more fiscal base and so on. The initial programs would be around infrastructure and housing. But there's big problems in the healthcare system, and we have to address those, and we have some ideas as to how we should address those. Now, how you time those and sequence those within the fiscal parameters that we're working within, that's a question that the government of the day would have to work out. And I'm sure that we're doing it in a way that is going to achieve the medium-term goal of getting our debt to the 60% of GDP target that is written into the law. But as the economy recovers, if you do the necessary heavy lifting early, you'll have a stronger recovery, generating greater revenues, especially with the revenue reforms that we were speaking about in terms of making the system more efficient, the tax collection system more efficient, that we'll be able to put in place some of these things that would make Jamaica a better place to live. We encourage our diaspora to come back here and live and invest, encourage our teachers and our nurses to stay so that our economy and our society is stronger. That is what we're trying to pursue. And these are measures that we think will help to deliver that.
Let's go to the next clip.
Energy costs in Jamaica are among the highest in the region and the world, averaging about US 40 cents per kilowatt hour. When we were last there, it was around 23 cents per kilowatt hour. What we would do, we would ensure that large customers, those in the special economic zones, can contract power directly from generators. Yeah. Now, why is this important? We cannot attract manufacturers, assembly type operations with the high energy costs that we have. And so our prospects of economic growth will not materialize unless we can bring the cost of energy down. And it can be done quicker in those SECs without changing any license. We would be separating dispatch, transmission, and distribution into a properly regulated structure with distinct licenses. We would disaggregate the electricity bills so that consumers can see what they're paying for, broken down to generation, transmission, distribution, system losses, and supply charges.
Okay. Can I ask you to explain,
sure.
Elaborate on that a little bit more,
All right, so
in terms of how it affects the average Jamaican, how that is going to help?
How is that going to help? I'll start by saying we have no control over what happens in the Middle East, and we're seeing for the fourth week that the price of gas is going up by $4.50 per litre. But we have a natural asset of having sunlight 95% of the year. When we were last in government, we issued a request for a proposal in 2013 to build out additional capacity, which came on stream in 2016. It's taken this government 8 years to issue a new request for a proposal. People were selected in 2024, and those build-outs won't happen until 2027. There's a goal of achieving 50% of our energy generation from renewable sources. We're nowhere near that. By 2030, and we're at 2026. The government should have been doing this every 2 to 3 years. Why? Because solar, wind is cheaper, right? So when you have spikes in oil prices like we have now, the pass-through effect won't be as great if we were generating more of our energy from renewable sources. That's something that we have total control over. When we were last at government, we had an energy efficiency program in the public sector, looking at the roof, doing tinting up things, checking all the ACs. We were doing that so we could conserve. Because energy, if you ask any householder, your light bill is the highest bill, right? If you ask a business person, that is among your highest costs. And so if we want to grow the economy, I mentioned the SEZs, we can't attract any business that is energy intensive here with the current energy rates. And there are things that a government can do, notwithstanding the international environment, to bring our energy costs down. And we have seen it from government, and we are saying there are things that they can do now that would bring the cost of energy down for the householder. I mentioned energy theft. Why? Because 20% of what we pay now arises from theft. But theft has to be understood and managed in a particular way. A big part of theft is that the people who steal, even if they want to pay, they can't afford to wire their houses and get it passed by the government electrical inspector. Government has to play a role in facilitating that. We started a program with prepaid meters that has been sporadic. The government put an initiative last year, but it doesn't go far enough.
I'm saying former JPS president was saying that, you know, this was Kelly Tomlin, that she had worked in so many places, and she said the theft situation in Jamaica was one of the most difficult she had seen.
And there is energy poverty too, and we have to recognize that. And we also looked at proposals for having mini grids in particular areas that instead of depending on the JPS grid to supply, you could use renewable energy. So I'm just saying that Jamaica can't grow its economy at US 40 cents per kilowatt hour. It's not going to happen. And there are things that the government can do to bring those costs down by relying on renewables, bringing more renewables into the mix, making changes that electricity can be more affordable, and we don't drive up the costs, which will happen now with the crisis in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, energy is a portfolio where solving that problem of the higher energy costs is going to have such a huge effect, multiplier effect, for want of a better word, on the overall economy's efficiency, its ability to attract capital investment into the country and so on. It needs to be well managed, and it needs to be actively managed by a minister who understands it and is able to really make it happen. And what we've seen in the last 10 years is that it's really been mismanaged. Very little has been done to modernize Jamaica's electricity grid during that period. As Julian said, it wasn't until 2024 that they issued their first request for proposals for new capacity to come on stream. Having been in government since 2016, we're paying the price for that now. It needs to be assertively managed because we are blessed with a natural renewable resource where the technology around that, solar, is getting better every year. It's getting cheaper every year. We must seize the moment and make that transition so that we can benefit as an economy from lower energy costs.
Just about out of time. Going through a final one at you, Mr. Golding. Political question. You're planning to